whenever I'm in a spot like this, I'm always trying to figure out, like, could somebody be overvaluing something? I actually think that it's possible that this guy could raise like a smaller flush, like the king or the queen high flush. 510, no limit, Aria, 2870, eight-handed, okay?
Yeah. So under the gun limps for 10. The cutoff bet's 30. I'm in the small blind with the ace of clubs, nine of clubs, and I call, and the under the gun also now calls. I did contemplate three betting here, but I just didn't want to really bloat up the pot out of position against two players. I just thought, I'd rather just
Yeah, I mean,
play
here,
more conservative.
that's another thing too, where the question is, this is one that I've sort of asked rhetorically a little bit too, where it's an 8 or 9 handed game. A lot of times when you look at these sort of pre-flop charts, and I've been talking about this sort of pre-solved app, Solver Plus, that's usually like 100 big blinds, 6 max. I think we can pretty much all agree that at 100 big blinds, 6 max, yeah, the small blind is probably going to be played, as a 3-better fold. When you start to get deeper, more long-handed, if there has to be some reflection of some calls in the small blind. So, ace nine of clubs as a call, I can get on board with it. It's just, I would say don't make a habit too much of calling from the
Right.
small blind. It is an overcall. Okay, so cut off to 30, you call. So it looks like the pot's like maybe 90, 100, something like
Pot's
that.
100,
Yeah.
and is the four of clubs, five of clubs, 10 of hearts. Um, I like to check. Under the gun also checks, and cutoff bets 80. Again, here now is another situation where again I could, choose to check re-raise here. Sorry, check raise here,
hmm
but I didn't do so, and again just opted to just call.
Yeah, that's interesting here. I mean, he made a very large bet size, right? On the flop. I'm talking about the pre-flop raiser as a continuation bet. Um,
Correct.
it is multi-way. I do think that you should have some sort of draw hands here, though, as a check raise. Although, I can sort of see it that the case being made is that once the pre-flop raiser bets so large, you might just always just play off a call, like if you wanted to keep balance. So if that was the case, and maybe $80 is that threshold. But if you had sort of made like a more standard multi-way kind of theoretical c bet like 35-40,
Yeah, like
I
one.
think that
Yeah,
I think that hands like ace nine of clubs, you'd very well consider check raising. You're losing to some other ace highs. You want to drive out the other guy. It's interesting to note that start to fall into like ace seven and ace six and ace three, of course, combo, but even like ace six and ace seven and slightly with ace eight, slightly better as a continue just because of the turn equity that you can pick up. Here you don't have that with the nine in your hand. Just a very, very little
right,
subtle things. So all right, so you
right.
call.
Yep, I call, and the under the gun folds. So we are going to the turn two-handed. The turn is the two of clubs, and this is probably the major question that I had because I have found often that once like a club draw, like a flush draw comes in, that also brings in some straight draws as well.
Uh-huh.
It's very unlikely that you're going to check and then, the villain's going to continue to bet. So I elected to actually lead here instead of just checking and letting him act because I thought that it might go check, check quite often.
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with you that a lot of times it will go check, check that often. I don't necessarily know if I agree with you about the straight comments. I mean, you're calling out of the small blind. What does the deuce really do for any types of straights? And unless like you are calling with like ace three as a gut shot, with ace three suited as a gut shot with somebody behind you, I think that I could sort of get
Oh, not from my perspective, me worrying, but in terms of villain worrying about my hand. Like
no.
he could be thinking, oh, he has ace three that got there, he has clubs that got there. There's a lot of things that got there for me that he would now just shut down
No, I
and
understand.
just
Right, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying that if I put I'm not trying to overthink it, but if I put myself in the villain spot,
right,
I'm not necessarily worried about you turning a straight. because you
Okay.
overcalled here, and it's like, what ace three do you have here? I mean, ace three. I mean, you're calling almost a full size bet with ace three with a guy behind you from the flop.
Right.
So I think it's like a little bit
Fair enough.
different if the board was like, 10 5 6, and now like the turn
Right.
was, a 9 or so, you know what I'm saying?
Nine.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's probably not going to be checked as much as you would think. With that being said, this is again like a live exploit that you can make that is certainly, I would say, very exploitable, because I have let out with nut flushes here from out of position, and someone could make the argument, well, what are you leading out with here that's a bluff? Because it's a very, very extreme flop configuration where you're basically calling almost an entire pot size bet with a guy behind you. Now, with that being said, I've actually even seen in some, like I said, in some of these pre-solved scenarios where you might call with a set on the flop and then sometimes lead turn, but that's not a bluff though. So it's just kind of, it's a little bit unbalanced. That's fine. How much did you bet?
I bet 160,
Okay.
which is about two-thirds pot, I think, or
Uh-huh.
just under two-thirds, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And the cutoff calls. Um, so the pot's now 580, and on the river comes the 10 of diamonds, which I thought was a great card for me. In real time, I was like, okay, this is a fantastic card because all of his 10x hands, if he has those, I am going to get looked up. When I bet here, most probably, it would be difficult for him to fold those hands. So I let out again for 450.
So the pot is like 580 right now, right?
580, yeah.
The
So
board is
yeah, just a little bit.
the board is four of clubs, five of clubs, 10 of hearts. Again, the hero overcalled the small blind with ace nine of clubs, flops a nut flush draw, calls a big c bet on the flop. Guy bets big, 80 call, turns the deuce of clubs, so makes the nut flush, leads out for 160, cutoff calls, pot's 580, and now the river is what, like the 10 of diamonds or something?
10 of diamonds, yeah.
Okay.
So I let out again another question. I mean, obviously I'm going to be leading here again, but what sort of sizing do you? Because I bet out for 450. Do you think that's a good sizing? Would you bet smaller? Would you bet bigger?
Well, yeah, I would say probably like 2/3. I mean, you're not gonna go crazy. Not, it's interesting because it's probably going to be very rare for you to. It's kind of rare for you to have ever just like a 10x check call lead range. That seems strange. I so
Right.
I think that where you kind of have to like go smaller in a spot like this would be if it did go check on the turn,
Right. Right.
and you sort of want to give your own price with bluffs, and because then if it goes check on the turn, you can have 10x and flushes. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, like I said, if I'm in the villain's perspective, I don't think the 10 really changes anything besides the fact that now
Right.
you don't have three tens, but you didn't really have tens up in this configuration anyway. So it's not like, if I've got kings or aces, it really necessarily changes anything. But I mean, yeah, I might
Right.
go more like 400, but okay, you bet 450. Okay.
Bet 450. Cut off tanks for about, I want to say between a minute to a minute and a half, and then he re-raises to 2050. And I hated this, to be honest. I hated it because I just, listen, people spaz out in live poker, but
Yeah, but
when
here's
I'm
the thing.
looking at it,
Here's the thing where I wouldn't even think too much about this and call again, even though sometimes people give me shit about, oh, like you always say bet fold, bet fold. So this is sort of where I'm thinking about here is that, you know besides him having four tens, right? He
right,
opened for a raise over the top of a limp. Now, if there was no limp, you always give him. He probably always going to have pocket fours or pocket fives, right? With a
right,
limp, that might change things like a little bit. Uh,
okay,
just so that there's less of that, right? The 10 comes at the end, so there's only one combo quads. I gotta be honest with you. The other
okay,
thing that I'm thinking of here is that it's possible whenever I'm in a spot like this, I'm always trying to figure out, like, could somebody be overvaluing something? I actually think that it's possible that this guy could raise like a smaller flush, like the king or the queen high flush, sort of recognizing that it's not all that likely that you have boats here, but I think it's even less likely that somebody in your spot just check call leads with a nut flush on the turn. So,
Right.
if I'm sitting there and I've got like king jack of clubs, king 10 of clubs, whatever it is, king 10 of clubs, blocking, not that you really, the 10 doesn't really do anything for you in terms of boats unless you had 4 10s and didn't three bet off, but king jack of clubs, king queen of clubs, whatever, even some of these Broadway king high flushes. And I was going to wait for the river to raise because, like, you don't have the nut flush. You check call lead. I don't know if this would necessarily slow me down. I mean, I guess I lose now to pocket fives and pocket fours that you might overcall. But I mean, once in a great while, it wouldn't be shocking that somebody ends up here with a king high flush. I wouldn't really I would call here for sure.
You would call, right?
Yep,
No,
yeah.
I unfortunately.
What?
Well, I don't know.
You folded?
I folded, yeah. Yeah. Listen, I mean, this guy, I've been playing with him for a few hours, and every time he was involved in pots where there was a lot of money in the pot, he always had it. Like, I didn't see him bluff at all. So I just didn't think that there was. I just didn't think that he would be bluffing here.
So did you ever find out what he had?
Tried to ask him what he had, and he said, "You should pay and you'll see." And I was like, "All right, I guess."
I don't know, Sean. I mean, you get into some pretty sick, crazy spots. I can't. When there aren't really two pair combos that make a full house. And what I mean by that is that there can't be any two pairs that the guy's logically opening that makes a full house, which means now he just has to have sets for a full house. And you've got the nut flush here. So yeah, he could have 4 10s and he could have pocket fives or pocket fours. But if I can find worse value that he could raise with, I mean, as somebody in the chat said, you could start to fold out smaller flushes maybe if you wanted to.
Right.
So,
I mean, listen, I don't know. It was just a few different things. Like, first of all, he didn't jam on me. He only had like a couple of $100 left. He didn't jam, number one. All of these different, and plus, I hadn't seen him actually show down with any weekends. Any sort of bluff catchers in these big spots. I hadn't seen him turn anything into a bluff. So
yeah, someone was saying the 10 is irrelevant. Well, not really. The 10 is irrelevant in the sense that, sure, it only really changes something with his hand, like if he's got quads, but it makes a full house if he has a set of fours and a set of fives, and Sean can't beat that. So, I mean, that's kind of what that is. But I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.